Hey, everybody, welcome back to Can I Have a Word, the podcast that explores language and its impact on our identity and the people we become. I am your host, Carl James, and I'm back with a solo episode. So, as you know, and as I've said a few times before, I've been going through a kind of career rebranding, if you will, over the past several months. And as part of that, I'm applying to different types of jobs, kind of across the board. And, for those of you that have been through the job application process, it is not necessarily a fun experience. But I've learned a lot in that process, and it's going to lead me to the word for today. So, as part of that process, you obviously have interviews. I had an interview recently where, admittedly, by my own standards, as well as by the standards of the people who were hiring, I was very overqualified. But, when you're looking for a new opportunity, you're willing to humble yourself and open yourself to whatever the possibilities may be, even if it's a little bit, you know, beneath your current skill set, but whatever. So I had an interview with a bunch of senior partners at this one particular uh, firm. And during the interview process, one of the partners said to me, in the course of me describing like all the things that I've done and what I can do, he was like, "Wow, you're kind of a renaissance man." And I was like, "Oh, I've never been called a renaissance man before in an interview." I was like, "I appreciate that. I'll take it." And I was feeling good. And again, recognizing that I'm overqualified, they know that I have all these skills, but I felt like, I'm building a rapport and everything's going well. And I had to meet with four other senior partners. A lot of the same type of feedback came across. So, needless to say, I was, kind of expecting like, okay, recognizing my skills are, where they are, I should stand a pretty good chance. Well, fun fact, I did not get offered the role, mostly because I was in fact overqualified, as I was told by the recruiter. Now, like I said, I knew that, I prepared for that. Um, but it got me to thinking about, preference and what makes us choose the things that we choose or choose the people that we choose. And so, no surprise, our word for today is preference. Now, basically, a very basic definition is expressing a greater liking for one alternative over another or others, right? Real simple. But the way I want to think about preference and the way I want to sort of, talk through it today is thinking about not just what we like, but what and who we select, elevate, or invest in, and the why behind those choices, right? So if you think about it like a almost like a contest. So if you think about being a contestant and then being picked as the winner, the difference between or the gap between being the contestant and being picked the winner is where preference lives. And so we think of our preferences more often than not as, harmless personal taste. And if that were true, that would likely be the end of the story. But the truth of the matter is, our preferences aren't formed in a vacuum. They are very much shaped by the worlds that we live in and by the systems we inhabit. And so that brings me to this idea that I don't know if it's original, but I'm going to call it original because it's mine right now. I'm going to call it the myth of neutral preference. So if you think about it in a sort of dating context, right? When you are, whether you're swiping on the apps or however you're choosing to meet people, people have preferences for, height and body type and race and orientation, all the things, right? And some people will be inclined to say, "Oh, that's just my type." So let's like dig into that a little bit. On the surface, that is true and it sounds pretty harmless. But underneath, I would say that our preferences are really echoing what we've been taught or programmed or even socialized to desire or trust. Thank you, social media. And sometimes because we have insecurities about wanting to be picked and wanting to feel like we can stand out, we try to emphasize or highlight the parts of us that are unique that will make us stand out, which, we all want to do. And so while that makes sense, then another problem comes up, this idea of what has been termed, I don't think this one is originally mine, the unicorn paradox. So sometimes your uniqueness can be admired and celebrated and praised until it becomes inconvenient. That's when preference reveals itself more as a comfort test and not a merit test. So let's move it from dating to the workplace. In the workplace, they would call it culture fit, which is basically code for similar to what we already have. So when people talk about, oh, this candidate is not a culture fit, they're basically saying, like, we have a certain way of operating, a certain sort of value culture within this organization, and this person, for whatever reason, a variety of reasons, doesn't necessarily reflect that. That is obviously a very loaded term, and I would say that culture fit is a problematic term. But that's essentially what we're talking about. And if you're somebody who, like me, if you are multidisciplinary, if you are too hybrid, if you are too many things, a renaissance man, if you will, while that can be great in a lot of contexts, in certain respects, you don't fit the mold. And in essence, the mold will win because you don't fit into the mainstream of what everyone else is necessarily bringing to the table. And so, again, preference being neutral really is a myth. It's curated by our environments, our histories, and again, the systems that are all operating at the same time. And so, if preferences are neutral, they also aren't private either. They don't just belong to us and they don't just impact us. They they really do act like a sort of a type of power, if you will, deciding who gets access to opportunities and who gets, quite frankly, left on the sidelines. So let's dive into this idea of preference as a power, right? Preference is, in essence, a type of filter, and whoever controls the filter really controls the outcome. And that's true whether you're talking about promotions in, professional or corporate settings. That certainly plays out when in casting decisions in sort of the entertainment industry, and even who gets invited into your inner circle, who you decide to, surround yourself with. And sometimes, and maybe I would say probably most of the time, the actual reasons for, having certain preferences really come down to invisible criteria, things that you can't actually tangibly touch or even really explain. Sometimes it's someone's demeanor or style or the vibe, you know, they give off. And those things sort of pull you in and you're attracted to them. Hence, you make a preference for those things. And those sort of intangibles, if you will, they aren't necessarily written into a job description or a dating profile, but they ultimately decide the outcome, whether or not you get picked. So even when you seem like the perfect, I'm using air quotes obviously, if you seem like the perfect candidate on paper and you may seem like the perfect match for a job or a person, somebody you're potentially interested in dating, you may still not get picked. And you're like, but why? I'm perfect for this role, or I think I'm perfect for him. Like, I'm so great. I'm a Renaissance man. And so I would ask you to think about your own preferences. Have you really ever investigated your own preferences? Like, really thought about the things you like, the people you like, and why you like them? And so I was digging into this for myself. And I think that people often choose safety versus risk, meaning people will choose familiarity and what makes them feel comfortable and secure over what may be unique or bold or daring because it just feels safer and more comfortable, which is not in and of itself a bad thing, you know? But preference isn't about just attraction. In that respect, it's really about avoiding disruption, choosing the thing that feels closer to what I am and what I will be comfortable with. And, in dating terms, it's called preferring the known type over someone who, again, doesn't fit the mold, but might actually be better for you. So it could be, for those of us who consider themselves to be unicorns in the world, I put myself on Team Unicorn. It can be lonely at times when it feels like you bring all of these unique skills and attributes and things that make you sort of dynamic to the table. You might actually, for reasons that you probably will never be able to explain, you might actually scare some people off because you might be too many things at once, or people can't put you in a box. And so they don't know where to put you. And so there is no place to put you. And so they leave you alone altogether. And, that doesn't feel great, but it kind of makes sense. Um, and if preference is really that powerful, right? Deciding outcomes in all these different parts of your life, it is something that you can potentially change or rewrite if you want to. So the question becomes, how do you do that? How do you start to rethink your preferences if you want? Um, and I think it starts with rewriting the preferences that we hold for ourselves. And by that, I mean the sort of quiet inner rankings that we apply to ourselves. So, when things are great, when you're doing well, when you feel like you're being productive or you're the polished one or you're together, you know, then you feel like you're worthy of credit, you're worthy of praise, I'm in my element, if you will. Then you feel like you're deserving of credit, right? But if you are tired or messy or feeling vulnerable, we don't necessarily want to give ourselves credit for that because that's not necessarily the best representation of who we are. And so self preference can lead to a kind of critical bias where you only give love or credit to yourself under certain conditions. But when we don't exemplify the best conditions of ourselves, then we don't give ourselves the same credit. So if you think about trying to rewrite your own preferences, it'll allow you to see a more complete person who's worthy of love and validation, regardless of, what parts look good or don't. You don't just have to love the acceptable ones. You can love the ones that are in progress or in development. Um, and that I think is a critical step in challenging, the sort of external preferences or the preferences you absorb from culture. Digging into your own preferences about yourself can then give you a sort of roadmap for how to do it for other things outside of yourself, I think. Um, it's no secret exposure changes taste, right? So the more you see and the more you realize what you might have been missing. So and that's true across everything, whether it's art, food, culture, and people. Like expose yourself to different types of opportunities and different types of people, broaden your circles. These are all things that you hear and, we think we do, but we kind of don't because, we really do sort of fall back on what feels good naturally and what we are accustomed to. Um, in a professional setting, you know, I was saying like the term culture fit, not so great. It's kind of problematic. So I would say, in terms of this idea of rewriting your preferences, don't think about it in terms of culture fit. Think about who might be a culture add, someone who would be additive to the culture that you're bringing. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they are like everyone else, but that they could be bringing something that's actually missing from the culture that you have. Um, because, systems that are only built on what they know don't grow. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but that's what I'm trying to say. Like, if you allow for new things to enter into the system, that is how systems and structures evolve and expand. Um, and look, I speak from firsthand experience. Challenging your default sort of preferences can feel uncomfortable. It can feel icky. But as cliche as it sounds, that is where the growth happens. And so, on behalf of all the unicorns, the Renaissance men and women, people who defy the norms, I would say continue to be bold, be different, even if it means you aren't always picked or you're not picked first. I think it's still better to live in that space of being unique as opposed to just trying to meet everyone else's standards anyway. Because at the end of the day, the most important preference you'll ever hold is the one you have for yourself. So you might as well love as many parts of it as you can. So, wrapping it up, um, I would invite everyone to just sort of think about the preferences you have. And the next time you really lean on a particular preference, ask yourself, is this truly mine? Or was it handed to me? Or was this absorbed from the culture, but I've never really thought about why I really like this thing? And you may not change your mind about it. You may still continue to love, whatever it is, your favorite ice cream or, this certain profile of person. But I think, a lot of us haven't really sat with that before and never really decided to, dig into like where these things come from. And you might learn a little something about yourself. Preferences aren't fixed, but the first step to changing them is realizing that they're not as personal as we think and that they actually do come from a place. And so, again, as a unicorn, I am learning to sit with the fact that I can be deemed unique and may not be everyone's cup of tea, but I'm good enough for me. So we're going to live there for now. So that's it. Just sharing some thoughts after, some interesting conversations about professional opportunities. So see what that means to you. Go off and think about that. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there for now. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you on the next episode of Can I Have a Word? Bye, everybody.